This underdeveloped state poses a significant limitation for science. Science, in its mature form, demands universality and comprehensibility, qualities that make it accessible and meaningful to all. Yet, without the unfolding and articulation of its form, science appears fragmented, its truths scattered and unintegrated. It risks being perceived not as a universal endeavor, but as an esoteric possession, a body of knowledge confined to a select few who have the capacity to intuit or grasp its unexpanded essence. This esoteric nature arises because the new form at this stage exists primarily as its concept or inner essence. It has not yet extended itself outward, unfolding its content into the particular forms and stable structures that would make it universally comprehensible. As a result, its manifestation remains limited, constrained to its abstract potential rather than its realized actuality. In this state, the form is intelligible only to a few individuals, those who are uniquely equipped to apprehend its undeveloped essence. Their understanding, however, is shaped by its particularity, as the universal remains concealed, waiting for the labor of development to bring it to light. The consequence of this limitation is twofold. On the one hand, science, in its unexpanded form, risks being misunderstood or disregarded by the broader community, its truths hidden behind a veil of abstraction. On the other hand, the individuals who grasp its concept are themselves restricted, unable to share their understanding in a way that integrates the universal with the particular. The absence of form development prevents science from achieving its purpose as a universal mode of thought, a system in which distinctions are articulated and ordered into a coherent whole that can be comprehended and engaged with by all. The development of form is therefore not an incidental task, but an essential one. It is through this process that science transcends its initial abstraction, unfolding its inner essence into a rich and articulated totality. This involves both the differentiation of content, where particular elements are brought into clear and meaningful relation, and the stabilization of those relations into a coherent system. Only then can science fulfill its universal aspirations, moving from an esoteric possession of a few to a universal possession of all, a shared framework in which truth is not only conceived, but communicated. The necessity of this development reflects the nature of science itself. Science is not merely the preservation of a concept, but the active process of its realization. It must move beyond the inwardness of its initial form, extending itself into the multiplicity of distinctions that constitute its content. Each distinction, while particular, contributes to the universal structure, and each relation, while specific, reflects the unity of the whole. This movement from concept to fully articulated system is what enables science to become truly universal, a living totality accessible to all who engage with it. Thus, while the initial emergence of the new form holds great promise, it remains incomplete without the labor of development. Science cannot remain an abstract potential or an esoteric possession. It must expand and articulate itself, integrating its inner essence with the particularity and breadth of its content. Only then can it achieve the universality that defines its true purpose, transforming from the possession of a few into the shared understanding of the many, and from a concept into a comprehensive and concrete reality. Only that which is fully determined, clearly articulated, and thoroughly developed can truly become exoteric, comprehensible, and capable of being learned. It is only in this fully articulated state that something can transition from the realm of private insight or esoteric possession into the shared property of all. Science, in its intelligible form, offers precisely this, a path that is open to everyone, accessible not only to the few who might intuit its essence in abstraction, but to all who are willing to engage with its clarity and rigor. This path, in its universality, is the bridge between the particularities of individual understanding and the shared comprehensibility of rational knowledge. The intelligibility of science ensures that its truths are not cloaked in mystery or obscurity, but are presented in a form that invites understanding and engagement. This intelligibility is what makes science democratic, an endeavor not reserved for a select elite, but offered equally to all who seek to traverse its path. It is not the absence of complexity that makes science accessible, but the clarity with which it unfolds its content and the rigor with which it organizes its distinctions. Through this process, science becomes exoteric, capable of being learned and internalized by anyone who approaches it with the willingness to think. The demand to reach rational knowledge through understanding is both the natural and the rightful expectation of consciousness as it approaches science. Understanding is not an external or arbitrary faculty, but the very essence of thinking itself. It is the activity of the pure I, the universal aspect of consciousness that seeks coherence, clarity, and necessity in its engagement with the world. For understanding, the intelligible is what is already familiar in essence, a shared ground that unites science and unscientific consciousness. This shared ground is what makes the transition from unscientific consciousness to scientific thought not only possible, but inevitable, provided the path is made clear. Understanding functions as the bridge between the everyday consciousness that operates in the realm of the familiar and the higher, more rigorous consciousness demanded by science. It is through understanding that unscientific consciousness recognizes itself within science, finding in its intelligible form a reflection of its own striving for clarity and order. The intelligible is the common thread that connects the two, enabling the unscientific to transition into the scientific without an insurmountable rupture. This transition is not a leap into the unknown, but a movement into a more comprehensive and articulated expression of what consciousness already seeks. This interplay between understanding and science is what grounds the accessibility of science. Science does not exist in a vacuum, disconnected from the everyday processes of thought. Instead, it arises from and builds upon the structures of understanding that are already present in unscientific consciousness. By refining and extending these structures, science transforms the familiar into the universal, the immediate into the mediated, and the intuitive into the systematic. This process ensures that science remains intelligible, not as a concession to simplicity, but as a means of fulfilling its purpose as a universal endeavor. The openness of science to understanding reflects its ultimate goal, the reconciliation of thought with reality. It is through understanding that science achieves its exoteric character, allowing its truths to be shared, learned, and internalized. This shared accessibility is not a dilution of science's rigor, but a testament to its universality. By making itself comprehensible, science fulfills its role as the highest expression of rational knowledge, accessible to all who are willing to engage with its path. Thus, the demand of consciousness to reach rational knowledge through understanding is not an imposition upon science, but an essential part of its nature. Science must not retreat into esotericism or abstraction, but must continually articulate itself in ways that allow unscientific consciousness to recognize its truths and transition into its framework. In doing so, science becomes not only the property of all, but also the highest expression of thought itself, uniting the intelligible with the universal in a shared pursuit of knowledge. Science, in its initial stages, is inevitably marked by incompleteness. As it begins to emerge, it has not yet achieved the full breadth of detailed articulation or the refinement and perfection of its form. This nascent state renders science vulnerable to criticism, often directed at these apparent shortcomings. Such criticism, while perhaps understandable, fails to appreciate the nature of science as a developing process. It overlooks the fact that science, like any living and evolving endeavor, cannot begin in a state of perfection. Instead, it must grow through the labor of articulation, clarification, and refinement. However, if this criticism extends beyond the recognition of these initial imperfections to an attack on the essence of science itself, it becomes fundamentally unjust. To dismiss the essence of science because it has not yet achieved its full development is to misunderstand its nature as a dynamic process of becoming. The demand for completeness and perfection, while legitimate, must be tempered by an understanding of the time and effort required to achieve them. The early stages of science should not be judged as if they were its final form. Rather, they should be seen as necessary beginnings, laying the foundation for the richer, more articulated whole that will emerge over time. This tension between the legitimate demand for development and the premature criticism of science's essence reflects a deeper issue that lies at the heart of contemporary scientific education. It reveals a struggle to reconcile two opposing attitudes. On the one hand, the recognition of science's potential and the demand for its full realization. On the other, the tendency to dismiss or undervalue science in its nascent state because it falls short of an idealized standard. This unresolved tension creates a lack of clarity in how science is understood and valued, both as an emerging discipline and as a fundamental endeavor of human thought.